So a couple of members, including Mr. Feely, you had mentioned some things to me you wanted to see if we could have a conversation about before the end of today's session, because it has to do with what do we think we need for tomorrow. And so are there things that we need to have somebody prep for, and how do we sort of envision that going? So may I just turn it over to you then, Mr. Feely?
Sure, I'll get it started. I just thought
if others want to ask, comment or ask questions, let's do the raised hand. And if Brenda would monitor that for us, and then we'll just start with Tom, since he and I have had a offline conversation. We want to bring it online now. Thank you.
Right. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I thought it would be beneficial for us to spend a few minutes so we're prepared tomorrow, that we don't just, start up tomorrow and have a free-for-all discussion that's not productive. I think one of the guiding principles for tomorrow should be what Gary described when he read his budget message, is that if something's added, something needs to be cut. I mean, it's a zero-sum game. The budget is balanced the way it's presented, so I think we start from that standpoint. The second issue I'd raise, obviously there were concerns expressed this morning by at least 3 of you about the sheriff's budget proposal. And I think it would behoove us to invite him back for a brief discussion on why he cut what he cut, and if there are other alternatives. I think those discussions are much more productive with him in the room. I understand the frustration with dealing with an independently elected official. I've worked in that environment before. I'll just give you an example where I think that worked. 2 years ago, during the budget committee, I was told repeatedly by county staff that the sheriff was refusing to do performance Clackamas. Now, I knew him from serving on the ELED advisory committee, and so I called him. I said, "Are you refusing to do it?" He said, "No, I'll do it." And I said, "Well, I'm going to ask you tomorrow during the budget hearing, will you do it?" And I did ask him, and he said, "Yes, I will do it." And he did it. So that's an example of like having direct discussions, and I can see the frustration on your face, Jim. Anyway, that's all for me, but I know there are other issues that some of you have. I just let's get them on the table and we can start tomorrow prepared.
Yes, thank you. Brenda?
Mr. Savas?
For tomorrow, what I'd like to see, just from where we were this morning, I would like to see those 5, 10, and 15% budget scenarios by department. I have, from our conversations, I have concerns, and I just want to, and maybe tomorrow's the opportunity, but of the $6.1 million in cuts, I just want to clarify that in round numbers, what I said, whether it was late yesterday or this morning, I realize that there are some positions that were cut that were not just routine carryover paper type positions, vacant positions that were routinely year after year, maybe not filled. I realize there were some real positions that were cut, but I would certainly, well, let me just back up. As many of you may remember, a couple, 3 years ago, and I always do it, I was keeping tabs of what that carryover amount was in every department. And I think at 1 year, I recall it being $21 million of carryover. And we call that contingency or call that whatever it was. It was about $21 million. But I just want to acknowledge then and now that I always saw that as one-time money. If we were to actually purpose that money, whether it was backfilling or whether it was filling a gap, whatever it may be, that it was one-time money. And I recognize that what the staff proposal we have before us, the budget proposal we have before us, actually is doing just that. You saw that money being given up and put back in. So kudos, great job. But remember, that's not ongoing. That's really one-time money. And the positions that have been routinely and historically vacant is one-time positions, and it's not real money. That part's not real money. So getting back to my analogy about the hole in the boat, I'm trying to look for or find a way that we actually are going to close close that structural hole in the boat, so to speak. And that's where I'm hoping that maybe some of those positions that I pointed out this morning that we talked about, which came out in human resources, whether it was the 59 positions that human resources staff had told us about this morning versus what is in tab 2, page 6 or 5 on the FTEs. I would really like to know what that structural reduction in positions are for the budget. Like I said, in tab 2, it says that number is 2189 or 2173. I think 2173. That's still not back to the 1819 numbers. And I maintain that the budget that we had in 1819 is probably not even a manageable budget today. And I'm thinking that we need to talk about sizing, or whether it's right sizing. My concern is that we actually have a budget that we know will be sized for the future years. And I think we have to just face the music that right now, and has been, that we don't have a budget that is sustainable. And that's the part that I have a lot of discomfort. If we're not making a lot of progress and enough cuts this year, and even though about whether it's a year or 2 years or whatever it may be, that we need to have a clear path that we are making progress on closing that hole. And I just haven't seen structurally today, at the end of the day, haven't seen where that there's any significant closure of that structural hole.
Mr. Schrader.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Savas, for that. I think we're all worried about that, actually. I wanted to thank Mr. Feely for mentioning that we should have the sheriff's office back. I do think that's actually the boogeyman in the room. And I will be very clear that this is nothing new. These kinds of conversations about the sheriff's office have been going on since I was first a commissioner, because of how the cuts are made and how it reflects on how we prioritize public safety in a way that sometimes isn't quite fair, I guess, in my opinion. The other thing I would like to take a look at and make sure I get, when Health, Housing, and Human Services looked at the changes in budget reductions, which is really all general fund, I'd like to take a look and see what other, I find it hard to believe it's just these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, general fund accounts. I have no idea how they were prioritized for reductions. And I, as a commissioner, would like to take a look and see if I can get the information of what other general fund activities are going on in human resources, because we may very well want to prioritize things that are already there. For example, one of the cuts has to do with our vet village, which has always been a top priority of the counties. And so I have no idea why that $283,000 ended up as part of the cut package. And, you don't want to see the Washington Monument cut, I guess, is one way I could state this, is that that's been a priority that we've always had, that we've always pushed. And I think we need more discussion on what the criteria were. Once again, page 10, Health, Housing, and Human Services Department, and I'd like to get that information to discuss tomorrow.
Are you suggesting that we have somebody from H3S, have Rich or someone come back tomorrow as we are with,
I think we
with the sheriff?
Really our job to prioritize what general fund is spent on. And when I see a legacy project such as that is somehow ending up on a chopping block that we all agreed to in 1819, and we've all agreed that veterans were our top priority, that worries me a little bit. It just makes me uncomfortable about motivation, I guess. Just saying.
Okay. Oh, Brenda. Yeah, thanks. Next one.
Bernard.
The sheriff, most of what he usually does, and Gary actually talked to him a little bit about this when he did ask him for cuts is no, don't go to personnel. Look at your programs. And he always goes to personnel and shutting jail beds. I don't have any idea what all his programs are. I don't know that we have access to know what they are. It'd be great if we had a list of his programs so that we could prioritize, like Martha just said, what we think is valuable or not. And I can assure you most of them probably are, but I don't know what they are. We've never had that opportunity. The other thing that I brought up earlier today is that when OIR did their analysis, they suggested 51 changes. We don't know that he did one of them. He basically said, "You look," and so there's a consequence to not doing what you're asked. The other thing is that the challenge of making some of these cuts now is that we're just getting the data. We make a mistake because we don't have the information we need to make the decision. It's going to take a while to do that. And then finally, the state cuts that we will be hearing about, we don't want to eliminate something that they support and we don't, or we cut because we thought they were going to make the cuts. I disagree with Paul. Positions that are carried over are positions, and that is real money. Because if they're filled, real money goes out the door. No money, and we budget for that money. And I really appreciate that we eliminated a lot of those. And one thing, one of our employees told me about Clackamas County's budget, and Gary fixed that, and that is it's the wild, wild west of budgets, because the carryover or contingency that a lot of departments used to have, they were pretty much free to do with what they want. And we call them in. And that's a tough decision and a very, very important decision. And Elizabeth and her accounts payable, or her ballot closing the books every month, is going to make a huge impact. We have been years behind in updating our books. We were still using columns on a spreadsheet. I forget what that used to call it. Double entry accounting in 2020. And I mean, I could have done better with QuickBooks. Anyway, thanks.
Mr. Fisher?
I'm not sure. I brought up the things that we've got along. I am concerned about the cuts to homelessness and H3S, because I think that could jeopardize our $26 to $10, and I want an answer for that. And if it will, and I'm pretty sure that it will, we need to figure out what we're going to do about that. And then I don't know what our process should be with the sheriff. I would like to know, can we just say, sorry, we're not accepting these cuts, you're not cutting personnel, and you're taking out of materials and services?
Yeah.
I mean, Gary, can we do that?
Yes, you can. You have authority as deep into the line items of every single county department. I don't encourage you to go that deep, but yes, you can. You can direct any department, including an elected official, how their money will be allocated.
So then maybe somebody should, because tomorrow's really fast, and I don't know if we want to hold off doing this tomorrow and maybe do it next week, but to say to the sheriff, come back with something else, because this isn't what the commission is comfortable with. So
We could.
Chair Park?
those are my two things, and I don't know what we want to do about that.
Chair Parks?
Yeah. Let me first kind of in my own mind address Sonia's comment. It would seem to me that we have the ability to do that, to say this is really unacceptable. Or for instance, we've tried for a long time to get these jail beds opened, and then you got them opened and you got the people, and now all of a sudden you're shutting them again. And so what kind of programs, you know, could you do? But to do it by tomorrow, I don't see that that's really feasible. I don't know if the budget committee would want to reconvene, you know, and look at that at a later date. That's certainly an option. But the main thing that I have been making notes throughout, you know, about some of the things that we had concerns about and how we might have discussion about those. And I think the major thing that I was hoping would come out of this discussion is for us to be comfortable with a budget that's been laid out over many months' time by talking to every department, by looking at all the nuances. Do we have the ability to do that, especially with COVID-19? COVID-19 has changed everything, and we don't really know what those changes are yet. And I'm concerned that it may be a great budget. I'm concerned that it may be a not too good budget, and we make some changes that, you know, help it be much stronger in the future. We know the departments, because they've said so in the last 2 days, that don't feel like they have a sustainable budget. Even that administrative, you know, is not felt to be a sustainable budget. So I guess I'm just asking that we be very intentional in our thoughts, and that we give the right kind of credibility and credence to the work that has been done, and find out what pieces of that may need to be different, if in fact they do, so that we can be comfortable with adopting a budget that can move us forward, with the realization that there needs to be supplemental budget discussions sooner rather than later, because of the interesting time that we're in right now. So that's my thoughts at the moment. Thank you.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, there's no need for anything to be personal. And it seems as though that maybe, Jim, maybe you either misunderstand or maybe you misspoke, but it feels as though this is like personal. This is not the first time during this budget cycle that you've done or mischaracterized something that I've said. But I want to just clarify, and maybe staff could actually confirm or not, that if there is a, hypothetically, if there, well, not hype, we have in our budget, years after year after year, there have been unfilled positions, and the monies in those unfilled positions were never spent, and they just sat there. So my question to you, Gary, or Elizabeth, or both, is that if there is an unfilled position in the budget and the monies were never spent, and we cut that unfilled budget, is that going to reduce our structural hole in the budget?
So what happens each year as that department is budgeting for that position they're not filling? That money is still, if it's a general funded,
It's there.
it's still being funded. And that's where the buildup comes from. So if you eliminate that vacant position, then it won't be funded anymore.
But yeah, I understand it's not funded, but it's not spent, right?
So then you have to look at that beginning revenue or the ending fund revenue left over. And that's what we've done this year as we begin the process. If there's general fund dollars that are unspent, we are pulling them back into the general fund. And that is a best practice, an accounting best practice.
Agreed. All I'm saying is that the monies were never spent, then any reference to cutting a real position and real monies is not accurate, because you're not cutting a person if the position is not filled. And if the monies were never spent, then they just weren't spent. And so I'm saying that's not a structural, that's my point. And I understand that the carryover being drawn in for that one-time expenditure is a one-time cycle. But I just, maybe that's not clear to everyone. I believe I understand it. I believe I understand your explanation. But I'm not sure that everyone understands that. Because if you took the total, if we took the total of all the unfilled positions and that totaled a certain amount of money, that's money we didn't lose because we never spent it.
You didn't have to budget for it.
But you no longer are applying funds to it. So say it's $500,000 for 37 positions. That's $500,000 you don't have to expend, because where that money was going, it's still being transferred to that department. And so if you eliminate the position, you're no longer transferring those funds.
Right, no, understood. And I just want to make it also, the other clarification I want to make, and that is that my goal and my suggestion all along is to use attrition as the means to do the budgeting. And I'm just a little bit disappointed that the hiring freeze did not generate, and we don't know yet. I'd like to, maybe tomorrow we get the answer to that. What did that really generate in savings?
Ms. Caldwell?
Thank you. I would consult county counsel on this. My understanding from prior sheriff's questions is that you set the ceiling for his budget. And
Right.
Certainly you want your budget document to reflect your policies, but the sheriff has the legal right to spend his budget how he wants.
Commissioner Bernard?
Paul, I wasn't attacking you, but I still think that is real money. From the explanation I just heard, absolutely, that's money that's there. If we didn't fill any position, and I don't know how many of those are vacant positions, we would be able to address the structural problem of the county. Anyway, I want to mention something about, and Sean, you're absolutely right. We give him the money, he spends it like he likes. But the problem is it's politically done. I look for, well, I hope you guys work better with the new sheriff in town, that you can sit down and really prioritize the budget. Sometimes it makes me think that we ought to do an audit of the sheriff, but even if we did an audit of the sheriff, we could not tell him how to spend the money just by code. So that's a problem. And that's why at one point we had a bit of a discussion. But I'll tell you that the unions, when I met with them, said they don't need any more money. They just need the priorities set. And of course, for them, that's boots on the ground. But the sheriff does have a lot of great programs, in which they may not agree with, but I do. And you know, the work with Clackamas Women's Service and the Family Justice Center and all those things are just key, very valuable services. The Transition Center, which John Foote mentioned yesterday as not being successful, is a huge success. And so I'm hoping we can get that back open again as soon as possible. And he did a great job, and I'm proud of that. I think my first meeting here, when I first became a commissioner, I went over to Washington County to look at their transition center. And I dreamed of having that happen, and it finally happened. And then we had to let it go. But even, you know, with the sheriff's budget, I don't know what good it'll be to bring him here. You know that every time we talk about cuts, it's always jail beds and boots on the ground. Always, always. So I'm hoping the new sheriff in town will be a little more, a little better partner. Thank you.
I just want to point out before we get to these next couple that we've got about 10 minutes, and you know, we do want to start the public hearings on time. So if we go over that, it's time out of our break time that's going to be affected, because we will start the public meeting at 5:30. So, and what I hope to come out of this is if there are things we need tomorrow, then let's define that. We've got a couple of things already that have been said that are items of coalition, I guess you'd say, that we could have that would help us, like what Paul mentioned. And do we have the sheriff in and talk to him and say we're concerned or not? You know, that's a decision point. So Brenda, you want to go ahead with the other two folks that are listed so far?
Mr. Humberston.
Oh, where'd he go? Oh, there he is.
Was that me?
Yes.
You didn't finish the whole word, or it didn't come through? I wasn't sure.
I wasn't speaking in shorthand.
About 10 months ago, Gary and his team recognized that we were going to have budget shortfall going forward, and that we needed to begin to adjust right away. And they made significant cuts over the year. I don't remember exactly what the number was. Gary, you might refresh my memory on that. But it was a significant amount of savings just in this fiscal year. And when we met 4 months ago as a budget committee, we gave direction to Gary and to Elizabeth to bring us a balanced budget without layoffs in the general fund and a glide path to a sustainable budget within, I think it was either 5 years or 3 years. I think we decided on 3, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong on that. From what I have seen in this budget, they have done precisely that. The complicating factor that we have no way of knowing is what is going to happen in those programs that are not general fund funded. And those are funded by the state and federal government and various sundry grants and whatnot like that. Until we know that, this is not the time, in my opinion, to take a meat axe to the program that has been delivered to us today by Ms. Comfort and Gary Schmidt. This gets us going the direction we told them we wanted to go, in the manner in which we told them we wanted to go. The next decisions are going to have to be made on the basis of what we know the income to be from the state or federal government and other sources. I can find $10 million. I can tell you that right now. I could tell you 4 programs. We could cut all 4 programs and have $10 million if you want to lay off a bunch of people and not provide certain services. I have it right here on a piece of paper. But I don't want to lay off people, and I don't want to cut those programs unless there is no other solution. And at this point, I've seen nothing that says there's no other solution. We still have on the table the option to do furloughs that our unions have agreed to work with us on, just as one example of a solution. We still have some personnel cuts we could make if push comes to shove, though it may strain our workforce some. But at this point in time, I think they've delivered the product that we asked them to deliver 4 months ago. They've made millions of dollars worth of cuts. I'd like to see where we go from here when we know what the state and federal funds are.
Okay. Jan Lee.
Yes, I mostly echo Commissioner Humbertson, because we actually have 2 choices. We can take the budget we have now and call it a jumping off point, as Elizabeth has shared, and then come back with the supplemental budget. The other option we have is the governor's executive order gives us time to wait to do this budget. The legislature is supposed to have a special session in June. We could even wait longer and make decisions knowing what the state funds will be. I don't know what that does with the federal funds, but that's another option. I think the most practical one is probably just to go with what we have and come back with a supplemental.
Thank you. Commissioner Savas.
I think that we have heard a number of things in the last year or even 2 years. So since the time we recognized that the forecasting was incorrect, since the time we realized we did not have a sustainable budget. I heard things from, we can have a sustainable budget next year, or we will have, or maybe it'll be 2 years. So that's really the goal. Simple as that. I mean, I'm not, show me the path. And that's what I'm looking for, is the structural path to how we end up with a structurally balanced, sustainable budget. That's our goal. That's our responsibility.
So,
Commissioner Strader?
so here's my concern on 2 counts. I'm going to make a suggestion, because I understand what Commissioner Hubbardson is saying. I don't want to lay off people either. That's the last thing I think we want to do. But I believe that if we give the sheriff everything he wants this year, we're going to have to make deeper cuts later. So I guess I need to be clear that is the budget the sheriff brought forward the budget Gary recommended and Elizabeth recommended, or is it different? In other words, we haven't capped him at all, I guess, is what I'm thinking. And then I'm really fearful we're really going to have to eliminate other county programs. So that's my choking point with this right now. Okay. And I don't think that we can really dodge that bullet. And the other thing is, I would like to suggest, because I want to make sure, and I've been through this budget, I'd really like to make sure that it is meeting our priorities. As I said, Sonia had some questions about H3S choices. I have some questions. I think what we ought to do, I don't know about the rest of you, I'm pretty exhausted. I think it would be good to take tomorrow off and come back Monday, because we have time set aside to do that. If people would be willing to do that. There's nothing that says that we have to meet tomorrow and pass a budget. If we do it Monday, so much the better. But I like Sonia's idea of just giving us a little bit more time with this. Because I'm not convinced that what the sheriff brought forward is what's going to keep, I think it's going to put us in a bad spot. And I love the guy. I love the sheriff. I love everything they do. Known him for years, but this is a totally different time. And we are going to be facing supplemental budgets because we have no idea what the state's going to be doing. And we'll more than likely be having to cut programs then as well. So I'm not talking about not doing a glide path. I just want to make sure that we're listening to really listening to the recommendations of our staff. Okay. And I'm not sure that we really are, I guess. And that includes Elizabeth and Gary and everybody else. So what do you think about waiting until Monday and getting the information that we want to have?
I'd like to hear Elizabeth's answer to your question.
Okay, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Well, I can't find the raise my hand. Maybe I'm not allowed to raise my hand here. But I did want to comment on the sheriff's budget, as you saw yesterday, and they're fantastic folks. But what we did is we had in the past, you guys have heard the term maintenance budget. And so I said, we're not doing maintenance. Gary and I are like, there is no maintenance. We have to do what the budget can afford, what the revenue can afford. And so the 2 million that was initially distributed to their budget, which is 3% of the funding, we had to look at that and say, we cannot do maintenance increases, from the general fund.
Okay.
So that's what, it's not a new 2 million cut. It's, we had to withhold any maintenance because we're not doing that process this year or going forward. So I just wanted to add that.
So, but I guess my question then is, if we're not doing maintenance, or if we do maintenance, we will be faced with additional cuts in the near future.
And I think we'll approach it differently, but the maintenance implies that everybody gets, that increase, standard increase every year. And we want to be very thoughtful about how we're distributing the general fund. So this was a tightening. And I think, Mrs. Caldwell, you said it the best. This is a restraint budget because we're trying to get a hold of where all the funding is, pull the general fund back into the general fund, and be very intentional about the spending. So this is a restraint budget. This is our constraint. We built it on what can we afford, trying to stabilize over the next 2 to 3 years. And that's really our charge, is how are we best using the funds?
So I guess I would say then no other department right now has done a current service level roll-up kind of budget. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So basically what you're saying, the sheriff did a maintenance budget based on current service level roll-ups, and no other department really had the opportunity to do that. No other entity. I mean, they all had to they had to make cuts. They couldn't just do a current service level roll up. They couldn't add 3%, which would be like the rolling roll up as things get more expensive. So
correct. We all had, so if the personnel costs were going up, we had to make the reductions and cut somewhere else.
Okay.
And the sheriff did?
And yes, and that was we did, it was a 2 million, at 1.9, I think he actually identified of what that roll up was. That would have been the normal maintenance. And we just said, well, 2 million, which is 3% of the funding, to make the cuts, because we were asking all the departments, all the other departments, to do 5, 10, and 15%.
Yeah.
But because they are so, also personnel heavy, it was, just that maintenance, find that maintenance roll up cost to back out.
And that's when he decided that he would close the beds.
Correct, because we did not want any staff, but he's using all retirements and empty and vacant positions. He's had, I think 2 or 3 are retiring, and then some have given notice. So it's not any, the positions are going to be through attrition, where they vacated and then they're closing that position, not to fill it again.
Okay.
Mr. Feely?
I was going to comment on the sheriff's cuts, but that seems to be cleared up. I want to point out, I don't think he would think his budget's ideal. I don't consider it ideal. My wife and I were a victim of crime in Clackamas County. I called 911, and it wasn't a priority call that they respond to. So they're not even responding to all 911 calls due to past cuts and financial conditions. So I don't consider they've got the perfect budget. I doubt if he would either. But just for your information, we had a burglar at our mountain cabin. We had squatters in it for about a week. We arrived there and they went out the back doors. We went in the front door. That seemed like a 911 thing to me. They transferred me to the telephone unit. I wasn't happy. Anyway, that's it.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes, I want to thank all committee members for all your work on this budget and that you have been doing and that you're about to do, especially the public members. You're all volunteering your time for this, and we're not even able to feed you this year. So this is tough. This is really tough. And I would probably say for all of you, probably one of the most challenging budgets you've ever had to address as a budget committee member. And it certainly is for staff too. So I'm suggesting you do go forward and meet tomorrow, because one, you're out of time right now and you have a lot of things to talk about, and you certainly could continue to meet into next week if you don't feel you are at a point to make a decision tomorrow. I'm recommending, even though the governor's executive order allows leniency on timing for adopting a budget, I do recommend you go forward with the proposed budget you have in front of you, knowing it is not the final budget for next fiscal year. It will have to be adjusted, I think multiple times, more than once. And I think the more we delay it causes uncertainty for staff for sure, and for you as well. So my suggestion is to go forward and meet tomorrow, to look at the budget you have before you, to make a decision at this moment in time, knowing it will not be final. I will engage with you as we go forward in July, as we supplementally have to adopt and change the budget. So that is my recommendation for you to consider.
Do we want the sheriff? Do we want Health and Human Services?
Gary, what would you suggest? I'll go with your suggestion. I'm fine.
In prior years, you have asked department directors to be present on the day of deliberations in case you had questions.
Okay.
I certainly agree. If you have particular departments you want to have further conversations, it would be helpful to have that director present.
Okay.
So yes.
So who do we want?
Yeah,
Who do
tell
we
me who you
want?
want present, please. I don't want to ask 22 department directors to be on call tomorrow. So.
Oh, I would like to talk to Rich about I think Sonia would like to talk about the loss of money. Am I correct? I think
Yes.
I'd like to think that both of us would like to talk to him
She's
again.
nodding her head.
Yes. Okay.
So the
What
sheriff,
about
and
sheriff?
H3S, is there other departments?
Do we want the sheriff? Did we agree to that? Let's raise our hands. Okay, we see thumbs up. Okay, sheriff. I don't want the sheriff, but shall we
So-
vote?
My question is, should we have Mad Court come for legal questions?
Yes, I'll invite him in the morning. Yes.
Okay.
Is that it? Any other department directors that you'd like to discuss more with? Okay.
Mr. Feely? Sorry.
So we're done.
All right, we're done.
Are we? Wilda? Your mic. Wilda, your mic.
I keep thinking it's open because it was. Thank you. There are no hands up. I think that takes care of it for now. We know what we want for tomorrow morning, and that we're up for a good discussion, and that if we still need more time on Monday, we do have that held, so we can get there. And with the sheriff and Rich Swift and others coming, at least we can have dialogue with them about our concerns so that they'll know what those are going forward, even if nothing changes in the budget that's been presented to us at this point. There's benefit in at least having them be aware, in the future. So